Hi, this is Greg Kihlstrom. Welcome to the Agile World podcast, where we discuss customer experience, employee experience, and transformation in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to TEKsystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, The Center of Experience, a blueprint for creating an experience-led organization, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. I'm excited to introduce part one of a special three-part series about how security teams have responded to the pandemic and what actions companies can take to fortify the enterprise. Brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. Today, we're going to talk about some impacts from the pandemic, and we'll discuss the roles and responsibilities in security and what approaches organizations should take to build talented security teams. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome the Practice Executive for Risk and Security Services at TEKsystems, Mike Mulligan. First, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and what you do at TEKsystems?
Greg, how are you? I've been in the tech industry for, over 20 years now. So we've seen a lot of different things. And I spent most of my time in front of customers in that time frame in the infrastructure space, the security space. And currently my role today is I head up the risk and security area of the business for TEKsystems. So I lead our North American teams as we work with customers to build security solutions and help them along the way and the challenges around cybersecurity, privacy, compliance, and areas like that. So there you go.
Great. Well, yeah, looking forward to having this conversation. And so let's get started by providing a little context and background for the audience. How is the typical security organization structured in terms of the different types of roles and responsibilities?
Well, I think as everything we talk about today, there's a new normal, right? There's the COVID normal. So everything's evolving and changing. I mean, certainly in most organizations, large organizations, you have a CISO, a chief information security officer, or maybe just a chief security officer, a primary decision maker. But what, has certainly been seen here recently, and really security leaders have been saying this for a long time, but security is everything, whether it's a development group developing an application, whether it's an IT group that's, dealing with network infrastructure and servers and the like. It could be physical access, right? We have a lot of different access points physically in an organization. We've got these IoT devices, Internet of Things, creating, more connected devices. So, when you really think about what security leaders and organizations are dealing with, it's all organizations and a lot of different areas of the business have to think about security. So I think what you're going to begin seeing, and you've already started to see, is these organizations really rethinking and evolving that structure. In addition to what I just talked about, the trends around cloud and digital transformation and this ever-evolving threat landscape, all those things are accelerating in the COVID. I can't call it post-COVID world, but, the COVID world that we're in. And I think that, what you may begin to see is this security leader over all of those functions, whether it be IT security, operational security, privacy, compliance, fraud, all these areas of the business that are dealing with it in some way, shape, or form. And perhaps over time you'll have one leader that kind of brings all those organizations together. So everything's changing and accelerating. So it's hard to say like what it is, and certainly I think there's some things where we might be going.
Yeah. So with all of this change and evolution happening, whether it's caused by the pandemic or planning for post-pandemic or anything like that, how do security teams and IT operations teams collaborate and work together amongst all this change? Is there often friction between the two?
Well, I think so. And I think there's always been some friction there. They have two different charters. The IT operations team may have historically dealt with the help desk or network infrastructure, server device support, really trying to enable the business and continuity, where the security operations groups were dealing with assessing risk, vulnerability, dealing with cyber attacks and threats, and really trying to maintain compliance and secure the business. They were distinct groups with, separate functions in the distinct charter. But clearly friction occurred, historically in the world we're in today and where we're moving. You're dealing with speed of delivery or speed of resolution in the IT operations world, whereas, the security folks may be thinking more about secure delivery or resolution to those incidents. So now more than ever, they must work in collaboration and partnership. And it's for all the things we just kind of talked about at the onset. Digital transformation going faster, more technologies coming into play. The threat landscape is increasing and evolving. So it's really unprecedented partnership that has to occur now in this new reality. So you may see things like new metrics and objectives of those teams working together. There's more workloads in the cloud. There's more endpoints to secure. There's more infrastructure to secure. So inevitably, they're going to have to work really closely together.
Yeah. What are some of the ways, you mentioned that the pandemic has impacted security and the teams involved, but what are some of the specific ways that the pandemic has impacted them?
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, probably, and I'll try not to do that. But, I think the first thing that most of us began to see is, was there work that was stopped, like a major identity access management program that, a company may have planned? Did they put that on hold when the pandemic began to impact the business? Yes, of course. There were things that were stopped. There were investments that were held on to. But I think when you looked at overall, businesses were accelerating a lot of the existing trends. Digital transformation efforts did not stop. They increased. And that creates more work for us to secure in the security organization, more attack surfaces to be targeted from the bad actors. We have to talk about this remote workforce thing. Most organizations went from having some workforce remote, probably somewhere around, let's call it 20%, depending on, organizations. We went to 100% in a lot of cases, and you're probably very quickly, right? And you had to immediately move to enable the business. And, to do that, you opened some gaps more than likely because you had to run the business. So I think we're probably going to stabilize somewhere around that 80% number. But, I think most organizations have seen some good productivity with this remote work move. And I don't think many of us see us going, back to the traditional model anytime soon. Cloud migrations accelerated. The threat landscape, as we've talked about, bad actors. I call it a bonanza for bad actors. Like COVID created more opportunities for fraud and more opportunities to take advantage of the situation. So you could go on and on. Automation. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah. Well, why do you think security talent is in such short supply, particularly compared to even other IT roles, which can also be, sometimes hard to fill? Well,
it's a great question, and I think we all wish we had answers to it. I think the first thing that you would probably say is this was an epic talent shortage pre-COVID. In some cases, you've seen, somewhere between 2.8 and 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally. That was a tall order before all the things we just talked about that have occurred since COVID, which has clearly, created more pressure on that. So it's, COVID's only worsened the impact. You've probably seen, massive increase in these attacks. You've got your remote workforce. Quite frankly, these teams are outnumbered by these bad actors in a lot of cases. Why is it worse than other IT skills? I think is one, because it was bad before, and now the pressures are even greater. And I think there are some solutions that we've got to talk about. This bringing remote skills to the market is a really big deal. Now that you can access talent and hire talent that may not live or come to work in your local building or market every day, and you can use technology, is a huge deal to access the talent that, may not exist in your local. That really held us back. So I think that's going to be a big thing. Outreach to diverse talent pools is a big deal. In particular, women are underrepresented in cyber. Many other minority groups are underrepresented. It presents a huge opportunity to use that as a vehicle to help solve some of those problems that we're dealing with. But, I think to say that we're going to solve it tomorrow, I think it's going to continue to be under pressure.
Yeah. Why? What types of skills or competencies should organizations then look for in that security talent?
Well, this is, we've talked about this at the onset. Security needs to be in everything and everywhere. Certainly engineering skills are kind of a foundational element for a lot of people, in this space, and further looking for folks that have automation skills or even, artificial intelligence experience, machine learning. I think that's a big area for us to leverage to, as we mentioned earlier, help us solve this talent gap. I mean, some of it's going to have to be done through automation. So certainly you're going to look for that type of talent foundationally. After you look at that, I think we need to get really creative around, people that have innovation skills, people that really understand problem solving and can work with a team collaboratively to solve problems. And those people may need to come from, and I shouldn't even say may need, they likely need to come from areas like finance, core business areas, core operation areas, and kind of cross-train some of these folks. Because look, we're solving business problems in a lot of cases, and we're solving, things that are propelling growth in these organizations, and we've got to balance that with the security aspect. So I think at the end of the day, kind of cross-train some of these folks might be some skills that allow you to retrain folks and not just look outside for new talent.
Yeah. So, speaking back to the attracting from the outside, though, what are some best practices that, I love the cross-training idea for some of the internal talent. I think that's great. But what are some best practices for organizations that are probably competing with a lot of other organizations in the same situation and trying to attract and retain security talent? What can they do to stand out?
There's two things that I would go paramount. There's many more, but let's go with two things that are big. You have to use this remote worker thing to your advantage. This is a huge opportunity. Being able to access these talent pools, let's say you have an opportunity in Chicago, and historically you only looked in Chicago for that talent to come into your market, into your building and do work with your team there. Now you're able to look for that talent that may exist in DC, that may exist in Seattle. And because of this remote work thing, it's more common and certainly more agreed upon by both parties. That is a big deal. You've got to take advantage of that, and kind of this new way of thinking with this remote workforce.
Yeah. And
then it's compensation. We've talked about the levels of demand in this space and the low levels of supply. This work requires a lot of experience and a lot of high level skills, and you've got to take care of these people in line with that demand. And I think the misnomer that sometimes, or the mistake that sometimes we make, is that we think that, well, wait a minute, I'm using this remote thing. I'm in a market like Chicago or New York City. I found someone that may not live in a high, cost of living area. Perhaps I don't have to be as competitive with my compensation package. Well, think about that for a second. I mean, it sounds good, but now these folks also have access to all those other opportunities as well, in different places. So they're not mutually exclusive. You have to kind of think about using this remote worker option to your advantage, but also, securing them with the compensation package that's in line. So I think those are really paramount things, that I would focus on. Certainly giving them, career development and all the other bells and whistles around cool technology and the freedom to work on some things outside of their core, kind of going back to the innovation problem solving thing. That's going to encourage people to stay with an organization, but you got to get the first two things right.
Yeah, great. What advice would you have for companies that might be considering buying security services? What are the pitfalls they need to be aware of, and are there better approaches?
I think as I've worked with organizations that are hiring service providers to do a lot of different things in this space, the first thing that I would say is they're a very educated buyer, and they do their research. There's so much available digitally now for organizations, and find out what they do. So most of the time we see a lot of decision makers or buyers that kind of come to us already with a bit of a preconceived notion of what they want and who they think may be the folks in the industry that can help them solve those problems. So I think that you got to do your research from that perspective for sure. And you certainly want best in class solutions. We see this all the time where organizations may only look to certain brands, or certain name brands, if you will, to bring in and talk to. There are many providers outside of, let's use the air quotes, top tier, that have the ability to really customize solutions and bring their best teams and best people to your solution. And they have the ability to deliver really high quality and best in class service. So my point that I would wrap up here as a recommendation would just be, don't just rely on, the same organizations and the same name brands all the time. You're looking for best in class solutions. There are a lot of different diverse providers that can probably solve your problems in similar or even better ways.
Great. Well, one last question before we go. There's clearly a lot of work ahead for organizations and still a lot of unknowns as organizations continue to navigate their stages of recovery. In your opinion, what should organizations be thinking about for 2021 as it relates to their security posture? I know you've mentioned a lot here, but what should be top of mind?
I mean, yeah, you're right. It's a lot of the same things that we've seen accelerate here recently. Remote work is here to stay. You've got to stay on top of that. And, you've got to keep moving forward there and plugging gaps and, tools that need to be available for those users to be productive and secure. Digital transformation efforts are going to continue. They're going to create more attack vectors and more attack surfaces as, we become easier to do business with. That's going to create more, things that we've got to go protect and secure. The bad actors in all forms are expanding and taking advantage of, the world that we're in. The talent shortage continues, so you've got to be able to find ways to, use that to your advantage, as we talked about earlier. And look, I think we all believe more compliance is coming, right? We already are dealing with this privacy thing that's going on across all industries and the tech landscape for sure around data. Post-COVID compliance things will occur, with safe returns to work and other things that will probably happen out of this, other future pandemic planning. We've got a new administration that, could have new compliance and regulatory things that we'll all have to deal with. So I think it's a very similar book. And it just seems like there will continue to be more pressure here, in all of those areas that we just talked about. So, I think those things have to continue to be top of mind and pervasive, from, the board, down to the business units and the security and technology areas that are trying to evolve the business.
Yeah, great. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way to keep up with what you and TEKsystems are doing in the risk and security space?
Well, I think the best way is, TEKsystems.com is a great resource. There's some drop downs there for our risk and security services, and it's a great way to do some of that digital research we talked about before. And there's plenty of different things that we have out there and available for folks to tie into. So that's what I would say, Greg.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Mike Mulligan from TEKsystems for joining the show. Learn more about TEKsystems and their perspective on security at teksystems.com/versionnextnow. I'm Greg Kihlstrom. Thanks for listening to The Agile World. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by TEKsystems. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Center of Experience, from my website at theagile.world or on Amazon or other retailers. Until next week, stay agile.